Welcome to Harley of London. We actually are in London, and today Harley of London has both mental health and wellness, not only a club, but we are also online, and we have a magnificent group of dedicated and experienced doctors and psychiatrists and mental health experts who will help you with any part of your physical and mental needs. But today we're doing a podcast with two wonderful European women who've come over for this podcast specifically to talk about executive coaching. And we have Nicole Hyman, so welcome Nicole, and Marina. Now, I got that right, I think. Now, being Polish and having my name as Kempinska, you'd think I'd get it right first time, but I had to practice. But welcome, ladies, and thank you so much for coming here today to talk to us about your executive coaching. But this is executive coaching with a difference. It's very high level, it's very high powered, but also you're not making it stressful. You have created your own set of rules, your own model to take away the stress from people, to help them align how they work, not only in the business itself, the business framework, but also independently, but with each other in the business world, in the corporate world, which is incredibly stressful at the moment. So can I ask you, do you separate your work? How did you create your business, and who does what in the business?
Sure. So yes, I'm Marina, and together with Nicole, we run an executive advisory firm based out of Zurich and working with clients globally. And we do really focus, as you said, on the top of the organization. So we work with mostly CEOs and other C-suite members on one-on-one basis. And we also coach their leadership teams, as well as sometimes together combined with the board. And in terms of how we split the work, the answer is, I guess, we don't really, because we're co-CEOs. And so our business is just like a fluid co-creation, I would say. It's not the traditional kind of, org structure split of like you do this and I do that, and we're completely equal in our business, right? So there's some clients who we work with together as a duo. There's some clients who Nicole mostly works with, or I mostly work with, depending on the preferences, right? But I think what separates us perhaps from others, and why I say we are a boutique, is we work with the very few clients at the time, because many years ago we decided we want to really work with clients who are fully committed and who want to commit to not only us as a service provider, but rather view it as a strategic partnership, because we find that only when they approach the relationship as such, the relationship with their executive coaches, which is us, can that actually lead to a success. And so we've transformed our business, if you like, right, to work with much less clients, but go much deeper. Mm-hmm. Those are typically, as I said, more committed and also longer journeys, right, that take place, because true leadership transformation takes time. It's human brain we're talking about, and that doesn't change overnight. And so that's us. And the other differentiator that I would say, before we go into details of our framework and model and all of that, is that we coach CEOs, leadership teams, and boards into leading beyond profit. So it is really important to us that the clients that we work with are looking beyond just the bottom line. Luckily it is becoming more and more common that people are getting curious into like, hey, what more is it out there, that I could do? What's the impact that I can have other than the bottom line? Because that's kind of a given, right? If you're the CEO or the board. But what else can I be doing, or should I be doing? And it's a big topic, and it's a challenging topic for many of them. And so we support them on that journey, that transformation journey, which is a big transformation for the whole corporate world as such, and is leading, back to your topic, a lot of times to frustration and potentially to burnout, right? The tension between profit and purpose, tension between short-term and long-term, results is something that is challenging to navigate. So a bit of a long answer to your question.
It's a lovely answer, thank you. It's important that we do get the long answer.
Yeah.
And can I just ask how you created your framework? Because you have created your own framework, your own model, if you like. And in most business schools, and anybody can become a coach, they say. But to become an executive coach, you really, really do need experience. You need a model that people understand. You need to be able to communicate. You need to be able to interact, and people have to trust you. And part of your remit is the authentication of everything that you do. You've got to be authentic. You've got to embed everything that you actually teach somebody, because you're teachers in some way. You're not only extrapolating from somebody who they are, what can they bring, but you're helping them understand a framework and you're teaching them something new. So it's quite a vast offering that you've got, and that's why I'm glad to hear that you almost create a joint venture with them. Yeah. We are going into the future together, and I'm so pleased to hear that there are businesses that are working this way with you both. So tell me about your model. I'm really fascinated by that.
Yeah. So both Marina and myself, we have been in this business for many years, and also not only taught a lot and had a lot of engagements, but also observed a lot. So what we have seen is that, for instance, companies invest in a lot of behavioral leadership courses, and that's great. But if they do not have the vision right, or are not well connected to the purpose, they're not making the connections that are needed for something to be successful. You can have the best behaviors in the world, but if the whole organization doesn't really know where they are going, you still don't get the results that are intended. And that's really what we did with our framework. From all of these observations, we look at the whole, we take a holistic view. So our Leadership Alliance Ecosystems framework has 5 driving forces, and these are called the compelling vision, a shared purpose. With these 2, we reinvent the future, which should be a continuous process. And then with the other 3, it's the Leadership Alliance behaviors, the mindset, and the working together principles. We rewire for success. And with those 2 big elements, you get movement, you get the organization moving forward. So I think we all know that if we go into corporates, often the CEO will say, oh, we can skip the vision work. Everybody knows we've done that. And yes, at one point they did a vision workshop. But if we then ask in the executive team, can you explain me the vision? We get often 10 different interpretations. And if you then go more down in the organization, people are not connected to the vision. So what we do is we make sure we operationalize. We want to make sure that vision and purpose are operationalized, that it is part of my decision-making process. If I'm working on a project, I have to ask myself the question, is what I'm doing serving the vision? Am I connected with the organizational purpose through my individual purpose? This is too important to just be somewhere on a website and on the wall. So we fill it with life, and we make sure that executives start to actively integrate this operationalizing into their day-to-day business. And then when you then have great behaviors and investigate a mindset, because mindset is often skipped. People talk about it, growth mindset and all of that, but going a little deeper and really asking ourselves, what am I really thinking about our vision, for instance? Do I believe it's possible? We really discover how sometimes we stand in our own way and we're not even aware of it. So we come with tentacles. We pick up what people will innocently say, reveal this into these workshops so people can become aware. And then once this work starts rolling and we start asking, okay, what do you see in your organization? What is your team saying? then they become aware how, even if the behaviors are right, even if we have clarity on vision, that some mindsets are blocking the success. So then the work starts. Okay, what mindset do we need? What do we need to believe to be successful? And it's like, this is the invisible part, and it's so important.
And this is different to a brand, isn't it? So let's
Absolutely.
So people often think, and we hear this a lot, oh, I've got a brand. What is your brand? Who are you as a brand? So that's the individual.
Yeah.
How do I stand out? And sort of like, we've got these amazing brands out there, which, as we know, Coca-Cola started one colour and ended up in a different colour, and then you've got Virgin and so on. But you're talking about the purpose being something different to the brand, and people often adhere to a brand but don't understand the purpose of the company. When you actually start integrating that, and I can hear how you do that, you've got to get that alliance and people have to come together, which is incredibly important. Two things that sort of came into my mind is, what happens when somebody just doesn't see it? Do you have people that just can't understand that is their purpose, or they just won't accept that as part of the vision of the company? Or does everybody automatically, once they've seen it, just adhere to it?
No, not everybody does that, definitely. And what I would say is, if there's gaps there, right? So if there are some people that are simply not going to get on board with it, with either be it the vision or maybe the culture shift that needs to take place in order to bring this vision into life, that was actually there already before, but our work simply brings that to surface. And so when we start to do this work, we're essentially mobilizing the team. We're saying, hey, let's start moving, right? It's not just something up there, as Nicole said on the website. It's something we need to live every day, How is that going to impact your decision making, your strategy, your actions? How is that different now? We simply bring that to surface, right? And then the CEO has decisions to make.
Right. And you report to the CEO, do you?
Yes. I mean, it is the CEO always that engages us. It's the only way we work. If it's not the CEO engaging us, if it's coming from, let's say, the HR department or so, we're not coming on board until the CEO is fully on board with our work, because it simply doesn't work.
Do you ever persuade anybody? Do you have somebody from HR often saying to you, we need this in the company, I can see this.
Yes.
And then come in and persuade the CEO. Do you do that?
Yeah. So they would say, hey, come in and have a conversation, or maybe they would even say, come in and persuade. I don't think we have the power to persuade, to be honest. Like, there needs to be a certain level of openness and readiness, so that then our conversation brings them to the next level of like, I'm in. But if they're on the spectrum all the way out here thinking that everything is perfect, we are not going to be able to convince them that things are not perfect, right? What helps sometimes is we start our work by doing essentially an assessment of where the team is at and where the leadership team, executive team culture is at, by interviewing stakeholders, interviewing the executive team, really doing kind of deep in-person interviews. And we get some really solid data then to say, hey, you may be believing you're fine, but here is actually, what the truth is. And it's still then on them, whether or not they decide to act on it or do anything about it. Maybe they say that's good enough for me. It happens sometimes. They say, well, actually every team has a little bit of issues here and there, and ours is no different, but I think overall we're fine, right? And so, but what I would say, back to Nicole's kind of explanation of our model, I want to bring that back to sort of why we're here today, which is the topic of mental health and burnout. Because this may sound disconnected, but really is not. So when we do Leadership Alliance work, so we're helping essentially the team get aligned, and we're helping the CEO to get their team on board with their vision, right? And so that there is an alignment between the leadership team, first of all, among themselves, because that is often a challenge as well, right? Then the alignment between the leadership team and the CEO, and then ideally the leadership team, the CEO, and the board, because that is the power kind of trio, right, if you like, that is really driving the organization forward. it is really connected to mental health and burnout prevention, because what we've observed is that burnout doesn't typically occur from like this conventional kind of belief that it's just too much hard work. Like, I don't think that that's actually, we at least don't observe that in our everyday work. We observe that it actually occurs when there is friction, when there is lack of alignment, when there is a lot of wasted hours and effort and energy into just that causes frustration, and frustration then, when accumulated and repeated over time, at some point could lead to burnout. And so, making sure there is alignment so that there is minimal friction. And I'm not saying there should be no difficult conversations, because that is different, but are we able to have a difficult conversation in a way that doesn't harm our relationships, in a way that doesn't impact our mental health when we go home in the evening, right? Those are two different things. And so a lot of companies then try to kind of promote this culture of like, oh, let's be kind with each other, let's be nice with each other, let's be, we're one big family and it's all good, and we, and typically when we see that, we basically see warning signs all over, because we say that's actually not a healthy culture for an organization. There needs to be a culture where we can have difficult conversations, and we're able to have that in a way that is, that doesn't impact our relationships. We're able to separate the professional kind of, discussion from, the personal relationship of the conversation. And so that's, I would say it's really important, because if we think of executive coaching, which is the way we view it, right, in the kind of full value chain, if you like, of a burnout process, it is really, really critical for burnout prevention, whether you're the CEO, whether you are the executive team member, or maybe you're just a team member somewhere lower in the organization. The same principle actually applies everywhere.
And burnout, let's talk about burnout. I've got some quotes from people that I've heard talk about burnout. One of them said, he's trapped by work. This is an entrepreneur who built it himself. He's overly ambitious. He's trying to do too much and expecting the outcome to be too much. Or he's called Tom. I can see my future Tom, but my present Tom doesn't live up to my future Tom. This, expectations people put themselves under. Now, you separate your work from the company, so you see the team. So as a board, you've got to have an alliance. People have to know what their role is, but they have to work in unison, or the company fails. And that's the same as a manager with his team, or her team.
Yes.
And yet, people feel they're letting the team down. And where does the pressure come from? At what point? I've met people that have had burnout. They've had to move away from work for a period of time because it's become too extreme. Not necessarily because it comes from within the business, but sometimes people are just so amazing at what they do, and they're so willing to take on more work, and they realise how vital they are to the company, that people say, okay, I've got all these people to choose from, I'll choose that person because they are fantastic at what they do it quickly, they're engaged, they have results, so let's do more. And suddenly that person finds that they've almost come to a brick wall and they've just stopped. And what's your experience, because you not only deal with teams but you deal with individuals, what's your experience of burnout?
So yes, passion can be dangerous. It comes in disguise, in all full passion, and when we can't stop, it can lead to burnout. So what's our experience? I would say we work with people mostly when they come out of burnout, because when they experience real burnouts, they take some time off, they take therapy. When they are already in a coaching process, we will work together with the therapists, because some like the parallel path where they will do what is needed with a therapist, and then with us as coaches work more on creating the future. When they are really in their burnout, they do not have the energy to go there yet. So when they are coming out, that is when really our work starts in creating the new future and making sure that the patterns of the past do not find place in the new version of who they are creating, of who they want to become. So then it becomes working on how do they want to be, how do they want to set their priorities, how will they set healthy boundaries. So we will look at what got them there in the first place and make sure that we install positive reinforcements to prevent them from going there again. And then, of course, these old patterns that made them successful in the past, they will pop up again. So we make sure they can identify them, that they can have a chat with them, like, hey, I've recognized you, you're fired, go away. And then really step into the new version of who they want to be. And that's really what we guide them into. And there, we talked about frameworks before. They're having frameworks gives like a framework of security to maneuver into. It's like a pilot who has a radar screen and continuously has all the elements on his screen and can monitor them. So that takes away a lot of stress. So I think that's how we guide people who are executives who come out of that phase of burnout. And
I like the fact that you've said, and we'll come over to you, Marina, with your example. I like the fact that you say you work with therapists as well, because it's like a family. It's, if you take a child away from their family and pretend that you're just working with a child, you're still going to have the same problems. They go back into the family, and the family have their own dynamics. So to work in alliance with people, what's your experience, Marina?
Yeah, I wanted to add, in addition to working when they come out of a burnout, like let's say, we're working with this client who is not yet in the acute burnout, but is approaching that. There is so much work that can be done. I will say, though, that is something that we rarely see, this example that you mentioned, at the top executive levels, because there is usually a limiting belief behind what you just described, which is like, I need to work harder to be more successful. And most of the executives that we work with, they've already come so far that they understood that it's not so much about working harder, it's about working smarter. So they know how to mobilize their teams, they know how to multiply their leverage, their impact, and all of that. And still, it could happen that they are overworked, and we help navigate that. But it is essentially, like Nicole was saying, uncovering what is the belief system behind this, because all of us actually start our careers like that, right? We start somewhere in that little corner, and we get ahead. Like the example you brought up, Maria, is like we get ahead because we are that superstar and everyone wants to work with us, and that's amazing, right? And at some point, what got us here won't get us there. And so it's time to basically upgrade or update our software. and unfortunately, a lot of us don't get to this on our own, right? So we need some support from someone outside to say, hey, you need to change things here. It's not about the circumstances. It's about how you're approaching the circumstances. So it's, it's like the whole software update that needs to take place of like, hey, this got me here. It might have served me really well working harder and longer hours. And where I'm looking to go from here on, it's actually only going to burn me out. It's not going to add more. And so what else should I be doing instead?
And do you advise people then at that point? So if you notice somebody within a group or individually, do you advise them? And if they can't see it, do you then advise the group or somebody in that group to take care of them and say, or do you say to them, look, you need more support? And does the CEO have to be involved? How do you involve the rest of the team? And how difficult is that to do when you notice that in somebody, that they're an amazing worker, let's face it, we have a great culture of work.
Yeah.
You know, most people that are in the corporate sector work well, work hard. There's a lot of people who do a lot for nothing. They support various ideas and they work extra hours. So they are very keen to make success happen.
Yeah.
But if you see somebody that is slightly off kilter and you know you've seen the signs, which we'll come into in a minute, but you see the signs, do you go to their boss or the CEO and say, look, that person needs extra help?
So if I think of the examples that come to mind, I think our coaching clients, they have listened to us. I never needed to threaten like I will go and speak to your CEO. No. As a support, I understand. Well, I would say at the executive levels, they don't like to talk about burnout. They will say, I'm stressed. They will use different wording, or the same for fear and emotions. They will not say I'm fearful. They will say I'm stressed. So stress is a word, a vocabulary that is used for many things. So it's also part of our job to detect what is this person really saying, and because it's a safe space where we expect and also have and give total radical honesty with each other. In the cases where I had to say stop, I think we really need to take this serious, what's happening here. I can say my clients have listened and taken it serious and taken appropriate actions to prevent this from going further. In a team context, for instance, one example I remember was an executive team where one member of the executive team had gotten cancer, and all of a sudden, from one day to another, stayed at home, of course, and the CEO was not very comfortable in addressing emotions. So as we were working with this team, there was this unspoken fear. It also confronts us with our own humanness and our own, the fact that we're not here forever. So, and in that situation, before we went to our program and what we had intended for that workshop, we said, well, let's take some time to talk about the emotions. What is this triggering in you? What are the thoughts that are coming to mind for each of you? And so we had an amazing, beautiful and deep discussion about the fears that this truly provoked. And that is important, because if we do not address these unspoken emotions, they become an immense stress factor, and they steer behaviors and conflicts. It's
those sort of instincts, like the defensive instincts,
yes,
protective, or sort of whatever the instinct is, can overwhelm each other.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's a great example of what you said.
Mm-hmm.
What happens in a group, but also that you can actually find that people can be confidential with you.
Yes.
Can take what you say seriously, and that you are supportive, as opposed to use the word threat. And they don't like to use the word burnout; they'll use stress.
Yes.
Now, people often confuse depression for burnout.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a vast difference between the two, burnout specifically for work and depression. And I think it's quite, I don't know whether it's a general thing, whether you can actually sense the difference in work, whether somebody's depressed or not. And I'm glad you're working with us here at Harley of London, because we have a whole team of, as I say, expert doctors and in various fields, including nutrition. So you can sort of say, we need somebody from this field, or a psychiatrist, we've got Dr. Balu and so on, and mental health, sort of psychotherapists like myself who've been in business. That all takes a bit of time. But can you tell the difference yourselves? Can you see? And do you highlight that for your organisations, the difference? Do you teach your CEO what to look out for? Do you teach your boards what to look out for themselves?
We don't. We don't consider ourselves definitely experts in, mental health illnesses, essentially, is what you're bringing up, right? And we also don't really diagnose ourselves, right? So what we will notice, Maria, is at some point in the process, you notice that executive coaching is simply not working anymore. And so that is kind of the early sign, right? When you understand that the person is there and they appear to be willing to take steps and somehow they're just blocked for various reasons, underlying reasons. Could be burnout, could be depression, could be different things. And of course we can have our guesses. We've been doing this for so long, but we never go as far as to say, hey, I think you're depressed or I think you're burnt out or anything like that. But we would then definitely encourage them or connect them, for further support and chat and a conversation. It helps. Again, burnout sounds scary, depression sounds scary. So as Nicole said, the easiest entry point is just to make it, to soften it a little bit, right, at the beginning, not make it like this big thing of oh my God, I think you're now, crossing this line. It's more like, hey, I think it would be helpful to do this or that. And in case that they are really not taking any steps and not listening to us, we do have, as certified coaches, right, there is a really strong kind of code of conduct and ethics that we adhere to in everything that we do, right? So we are not allowed to then turn around and go talk to anyone else on their behalf, because that would be a breach of that confidentiality. But at the end of the day, we are hired by organizations. And so we, for the most part, and the individuals that we coach them with the purpose of ultimately providing more value to the organization, because we're elevating this leader. And so if we're not able to do that anymore because someone has various issues that are interfering with that process, we need to find a way to bring that up, right, with the coaching sponsor, which is usually the CEO. And so we may not go as far as to kind of express what it is and disclose the details of it, but there is a process that needs to then take place, because at the end of the day, it will simply impact the success of the coaching engagement, right, to begin with. And so we need to, there is a need for intervention there. But to come back to your question, we never diagnose, and that's why, this partnership is for us really valuable, because, it's work that is very connected. And if we can, and when we do work in alliance, then I think our clients can really benefit from both sides, depending on where they're at on the journey.
And you report how often back to the CEO? I presume that's the person that takes stock of how you're getting on. How do you report back? Is it verbally or is it a written report? Do you do both?
So we involve in a lot of our coaching processes a lot of the stakeholders of the coachee. So because our observation is one thing, we get to hear the perceptions of the coachee. We do stakeholder interviews to understand the perceptions in the field and to have the feedback and also get the external perception of how the coachee has been growing and evolving. We get the perceptions out of his environment again, because it's one thing to experience, wow, I've grown and I have evolved, but if your environment doesn't see it, what is it worth? So in terms of reporting back, our it's not so much formal reporting that we do with the CEO and the executive teams, because all the they are all involved in the coaching process through their stakeholder roles in giving feedback to each other, and the growth is visible. So I think that's maybe why it's not necessary to sit together and go through a formal kind of report, because I think I can say the growth and the evolution that we strive for is really visible in the organization throughout the whole process. So we don't wait till, okay, we've coached for a year, now let's look back. It is an ongoing process. We integrate the process of feedback and feed forward throughout the whole process. So, yeah.
People are they concerned when they first start that they might forfeit profit in order to have the culture shift and change? Is that the main fear that companies have? Because you must change the culture. You must change the dynamic of communication there. And do companies worry that they might forget about, that people might take their eyes off the profit? Or is profit so instinctive? And I don't mean profit as a bad thing, because business doesn't exist without it. Yep. But, do people take their eye off the ball because you're working on culture or communication?
There is an implied fear sometimes that it's kind of one or the other, and that's what I mentioned at the beginning. That tension between profit and purpose is certainly something that we occasionally, I wouldn't say often see, but we occasionally see. And it is something that we then have a conversation with them about, because we basically then talk about culture being the biggest enabler and catalyst for whatever profit targets they have, right? And all of them will agree that people are their biggest asset. So if people are your biggest asset, well, then culture is the fuel through which you mobilize your organization, right? And investing in the culture it requires a mid to long-term view, which is sometimes challenging because culture doesn't change overnight, right? And so, we need to have a conversation around, hey, keeping one eye on short term and yet keeping the other eye on kind of mid to long term, back to Nicole's point of what do we need? What type of mindset we need for this massive, ambitious growth aspirations we have? Because surely the mindset that got us until here is not going to be enough. With this mindset, we're going to get the same results, right? So if we are looking to grow, even if profit was our sole purpose and sole kind of goal, culture becomes critical for that. Yeah. And so those two go really hand in hand. It's not definitely not one or the other. When done right, I will add that just as a final note, because the work that we do, as Nicole described, we are in the business with them. So everything that we do is immediately applied to the business. It is not some fancy offsite workshop you take once a year and everyone is like all inspired and enthusiastic, and then they go back and then no one really applies or changes anything. We do this kind of less fancy work of rolling up our sleeves and being in the field with them and really observing and checking in. We're part of the leadership meetings. We're there, we're observing. And we're calling them out if what we're observing is not aligned with what they stated they want, right?
And that comes back to your experience, I take.
Yeah, yes.
How has your experience helped you in that way?
Yeah. I'd like to give an example of the work we've done from what Marina was describing. I have one client in mind where the CEO was under enormous pressure from his board to perform, to deliver, to get results. And that's what he was passing on to his organization, and they were not getting the results. So it seems counterintuitive to start doing culture work. And he had the courage to say, okay, let's do it anyway. His CFO being critical and a little skeptical, but he did it. He took a decision there, and we started to work on the vision, on the purpose, on the mindset, the behaviors, how we work together. After 1 year, they had a 40% increase in sales and a significant increase in EBIT. So the focus was not on results, profit. The focus was on the whole framework. Are we working towards our vision? How are we working together? And for instance, as an example, one of the elements that we worked on in the working together part was the insight we need a higher accountability in our company. So we looked at, okay, how are we going to get that? How are we going to hold each other more accountable? It started at the management team level, then they started working on this with their own teams. So it's finding the 20% of what are the 20% actions needed now to get these 80% benefits. And the whole atmosphere changed in the organization. We had a much better culture, a much better atmosphere. And on top of that, they started to attract talents that they were not able to attract before because of the culture. So as I said, it seems counterintuitive to start investing there. But in our experience, it's the only way. It's not by putting more and more pressure on the organization that you will get the results you aspire.
It's so important in a company because, so everybody knows that they're to a great extent to make money or else they won't get paid. But if you're not enjoying it and you don't understand why you're doing it, the tone at which you might sell will change, or you interact with people, or you'll talk to somebody for a different reason. Mm-hmm. And what about the tone of communication? Do people choose to be responsible for themselves? Did they say, I need to be more responsible? They chose, once they understood what the culture was, were they happier to take more responsibility, to set their own terms of responsibility? Is that how you deal with people?
Yeah. So I would say the real benefit of this work, Maria, is like you mentioned something before about us being teachers, and it's true. We do teach a little bit, and we're very careful not to overteach because we don't believe that teaching is the whole picture, right? So it's I would say we put ideas out there, we suggest options, we guide them through the decision-making process, but ultimately the culture they choose is the culture that they will choose together. And so whenever we work with the CEO and maybe she or he would say, hey, we have this culture, here are the values, help me bring my team on board, we always say, well, it doesn't work like that. It's not going to work. We're not in school here, and even in school, that's not the best way to do stuff, right? Because it triggers the part of our brain that is kind of the compliant brain, out of like, okay, I'll do that to tick the box, but I will never do anything beyond that. Yeah. And ultimately, we want people, back to your point of like self-accountability, well, that happens when they're truly inspired, when they feel fully invested. Oh, now I believe in this culture so much that I have my own ideas of how I'm going to live it. I have my own ideas of the type of initiatives I want to lead to fuel this. And not just the initiatives that you give me or that you tell me I should be leading. And so that buying process at the beginning is really, really critical. And it's something that takes a bit of time. And as Nicole said, sometimes may seem almost counterintuitive because you're sort of taking them out of the daily short-term, emergency drill, right, to do this work. But it's really, really important because if we skip that and we just tell them, hey, this is the culture, can we just get on with it? It's just not going to work, right? And we see that over and over again. And we go back then to the point of how we work with our clients and then how we basically refuse to work, right? There's instances where we say, I'm sorry, but the basics are not there. We're not setting ourselves up for success. And we do that when we refuse, we do that for ourselves, but we also do it for our prospects, right? To save them time and effort and financial resources because...
So why have you refused to work with people? What have they been just too directive?
Yeah, so I'll let you take this one. It's an interesting one.
The examples are fantastic to hear, actually.
So we always assess, is somebody coachable? And if we find out and discover through the behaviors that we get in the pre-interview phase that they're not coachable, then we don't engage. I mean, it would be easy to say, okay, let's do it. You send an invoice, you get the money, you coach. But one, it's not fulfilling for us. Two, it's a waste of money for the company to invest. And it's a waste of everybody's time as well. And it has happened, yes. And it's sometimes a shock to the CEO when we do that, because they're not used to people refusing engagements. And in the cases where we have done it, they have found another coach. They have found out that it didn't work. And those two cases created more trouble for the company in the longer run. And so it was quite costly if you look at it. So we were right in refusing to engage. And we follow our gut there. It's a combination of an assessment of the cognitive, of course, but also of a gut feeling that we have, yeah.
And I would also maybe add to that, Maria, that is like, sometimes it's not so much the rejection. So the one side of the spectrum is the rejection, the other side is like, great, let's do this together. And there is all this gray area in between where essentially the contracting and the alliance needs to happen. And so what we find is that oftentimes when we go into these conversations, we're here and our prospects might be here through no fault of their own, because they're used to coaches who coach on hourly basis. They're used to coaches who take on like small, partial kind of tactical one-off assignments. Nothing wrong with that, but it's very different to the way we work. And so when we come in and we say, hey, you either commit to working with us for a minimum of a year or we're not doing this, it's a shock to some of them. And so then we need to talk about that. Why is that something that we require, and help them understand that we're also doing this for their success. It's not something that is simply a requirement of ours, but it's something that is really based on our experience of like, what does it take for the transformation not only to take place, but for that transformation to be sustainable in a way that allows us to walk away and see that client, and we see that over and over again, 5 years later or 10 years later, and they stop us on the street and they say, I'm still a completely different leader because of the work we've done 10 years ago. I'm getting goosebumps as I talk about it, but this is the sustainable transformation that we want to achieve with our work. And that is simply not something that happens overnight or in 2 months or 3 months or even 6 months. It's something that takes time, and a lot of our clients work with us beyond a year, to be honest.
And you have to really to create a different culture.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it's something that's very topical. Let's bring in society into this. Everybody goes home, and obviously you have an impact if you're working there. So let's talk about how many women there are in, because you work with top corporates, how many women are there at the top? And if there are fewer women, why is that in your opinion?
You want to take that one?
Sure, I will take this one. It's a very sensitive topic, as you know, Maria. But I will give
it's
you...
incredibly sensitive.
It's incredibly sensitive. It is. So I'm going to answer it from an angle, from our angle, okay? So I think there is one element to that, which is, the society and the culture and the history and all of that. And I'm not going to go into all of that. Like, I'm not denying that is a factor. It is certainly a factor that impacts, with what ease women progress on the ladder compared to men. But without going into that, the one thing that I observe, I'm going to speak for myself personally here because I think it's a very personal kind of topic, is I observe, Maria, that so first let me answer your question. Of course, there's far fewer women on top than men, and in fact, it is actually quite rare that we work with a woman. Like most of our clients are men. And what we've observed, Maria, is that given putting all other factors, like all other factors equal, women are far less likely to invest in themselves. They're far less likely to take the time to do this type of work. That a man is much more likely to say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to make it happen. I don't even know how, but I will do it. Versus if you have a conversation with a woman, it is, and again, I'm generalizing a little bit here, but just to give you a sense of what we're experiencing a little bit, it is much more likely that you will get an answer of like, I'm not sure if now is the right time, and I have all these other commitments, and and it's like that. They don't invest in themselves. They don't prioritize it enough, to be honest. And we always say when we do this work is at the executive levels, your success depends on your leadership. It's not about your technical expertise or your hard work anymore. It's really not. It actually stops much earlier on the ladder. That stops being a success factor, a differentiator. It just becomes a given at some point. So you continue investing in that is not going to get you any further. And so it's all about how early do you understand that actually now you need to focus on your leadership and building up your leadership skills and becoming a stronger, more influential leader in your field. So that would be my kind of little piece of experience and perspective. Yeah.
Do you have the same understanding?
Yes, definitely. And I'd like to build on everything Marina has said. I think, yes, we do see that women do not invest in themselves, or the opposite. They do invest, but have the feeling it is never enough. So that is something, a pattern we also see. And I think another big one is that men, we see them leveraging their network. When they need something, they call a buddy, a friend, someone they know, they ask for help, and they help each other out. And what we see amongst women is that they hold back because women have the feeling we are using a relationship. And it's not only a feeling. I think when we see women reaching out, we don't see them helping each other in the same way that men help each other.
That's my experience.
And that's a big thing.
It's a very big thing because men go to pubs and talk.
Mm-hmm.
And I know men that call each other, and you have, as a woman, I mean, I do more on the Myers-Briggs, psychological types. Yeah. So if you're a thinking type, it's a lot easier, I think. You don't fall, and Myers-Briggs is incredibly helpful as a sort of a dynamic, if you like, as a container, to understand the way you think, what comes first, how do you feel afterwards, and how can you progress, and to see a picture dispassionately, if you like. And yet they say in a boardroom, the balance between men and women is essential, because that's why I should think you're both so successful, because if you're in a very let's call it a sporty environment, because anybody who's been in a boardroom knows it's like sport, isn't it? Who says what? How clear can you be? You're on the money. This is my job. This is how I play it, and this is what I do for the company. And I've had women say to me, how do I feel equal in that? And some women are so threatened in the boardroom that they will take umbrage if somebody says something. If men play at banter, if they sort of talk to each other first, women shy away. I know women that have been overlooked, although they have been part of the success of the business, where they're not listened to. I've always said use humour. I'm a big fan of humour, as you know. And if women can learn to use humour, and because humour will equalise everything, but not to be afraid in that scenario, because it's like a playing field. that you have to be on there. And what are the strategies that you would teach a woman to move up the ladder?
So when we work with women, one of the strategies we teach is that start now building relationships with your peers. Because when they, let's say they move into the executive suite and they get there because they were successful in leading teams. So they're focused on the great teams that they have been working on. So now it is, okay, this is great, we know you can do this, but this is not going to get you any further anymore. Now it is all about these relationships at the peer level and starting to build relationships with the board members as well. And that's new for a lot of women. So and then of course, the leadership, the communication. Women have to talk much more about their achievements. Men do this all the time, naturally. And women believe that it will be seen. So we have to learn to be much more vocal about it and tell.
Yeah, show
off what we're doing.
Yes.
And again, this is against most of the nature for women. And it's something we focus on a lot because if we don't tell it, nobody knows.
But I find for myself, because I've worked mostly in male industries, that once you do that, and you communicate with men, and I have most of my advisors, most of the people I work with are men, and they're very helpful, incredibly, and some aren't, of course, but mostly the most help I've ever had is from men in my work. And that's not because women haven't wanted to help or they've not been able to ask, but most women are not on that level, on that league. They don't understand about investment. They don't take those steps forward. I'm going to throw something in that's quite controversial, but I would like the subject, and it's been brought up to me from some of my clients. So especially when it comes to men, there's a man called Andrew Tate out there who talks a lot about how women should be in a certain way. Have you heard of him? Yes, you've heard of him. Okay, and he's quite an interesting, some people say he's misogynistic, and he says that women should be back at home and be, so I wonder sometimes whether it's tongue-in-cheek, but nevertheless it works for him. But I've heard it translate into men's work. When they're talking amongst each other, look, why do I have to change the way I talk for girls or women? Why don't they understand this? And it's now they're becoming vocal. And this is in my therapy room, by the way, or in the pub, or through comedy. Let's face it, it's all of these dynamics. But people can say that, and it's okay. Yeah. It's okay to sort of vocalize this. But do you think that too much of that now that social media is having an impact on the way men are perceived? Do you think men are suffering from this? Do you think that we are now ganging up on men? We need men, and men are the warriors. They go out, and I love the fact that they're ready to take the challenge. Somebody actually said to me, although I was running quite a successful company, smallish in comparison to the big corporates, somebody said, Maria, how can you run a company so well and you hate skiing a black run? And I thought, well, it's like chalk and cheese, isn't it? It's like cooking in the kitchen and decorating, and it's two different sort of ways of thinking. But there is this sort of challenging aspect that people in the boardroom have. This is sport. I can get this, I can achieve this. And I love that aspect, because without that we wouldn't move on. But do you think the social networks, Instagram and all those messaging services and this type of why are women doing this? They don't need to do this. They should be back in the kitchen. Do you think that's impacting in the corporate world?
Well, this seems like a topic for one podcast only. So I think it's a very complex topic that you're addressing with many, many, many layers. So I don't think we can give like a generalized answer. But what is the reality is that on the one hand, the norms in our society are shifting. So on many levels, the position of women, but also in terms of diversity, people of color being integrated, all the perceptions. I need to be careful with my words here, and I notice how even talking about it, I become tense, because even if I have the best intentions of giving my message and saying what I want to say, I am aware that it might be perceived wrongly by someone. So I will do my best and come from a place of love for the whole world, and because this is a super sensitive topic. So what I see is that there's a lot of unrest, social unrest at the moment in the whole of our society. People are finding their new identities again, especially women have been on the journey, and because they are on the journey, also men are on a new journey in finding their places. And we all come from different backgrounds, different experiences, different wounds, different generational wounds that are into play. And then we haven't even talked politics. Yeah. So I find that on one hand, it has become extremely difficult to say the right thing. We can easily step into a minefield without having that intention. On the other hand, because of the social media, executives have to work on their executive branding. And consumers and people, they want to know, who is this person? Who is this leader as a person? What does he stand for? What values does he have? What position does this person take towards certain topics? So there is an expectation for executives to be vocal, to take positions, to take a stand, to be seen in social media, and at the same time, it's a minefield out there, and it's not visible. And depending on how we see the world and what experiences we have made, something that was said with good intentions can turn into something ugly. And for me, that is the difficulty today. That is the big challenge today. It has become extremely difficult to say the right thing, simply, for everyone. Yeah.
Does it impact in your work when you're dealing in the workplace? Do you find that people are more careful about what they say to you even? Do you have to sign an NDA yourselves?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely impacts the work, right? Because it's just the reality that we're all facing. But I think the way that we are basically working with it and dealing with it is that we try to, when possible, neutralize the conversation. So oftentimes when we're speaking about men and women, what we're essentially speaking about is feminine and masculine qualities. And we try to then translate that into what are the values we're talking about? Are we talking about vulnerability? Are we talking about collaboration over competition? Are we talking about what is a healthy ambition, right? Like you say, it's a sport. Yeah, it is a sport, but where do we draw the line? Because it also, we are a team at the end of the day, right? It's a collective sport if you look at the board. It's not individual sport, right? And so, that is usually the way we deal with it to say, hey, what are the challenges you're facing as a leader, whether you're a man or a woman or whatever else on the spectrum, is what are your challenges? And the challenges are usually, hey, here are my core values and here are the values of the organization, and there is this disconnect, and we talk about how to bridge that disconnect, because we cannot change the world outside, nor are we really trying to change it at the meta level, but we are changing it one leader at a time. And so if we can get everyone one by one to slowly find that sweet spot in the middle, right, at the intersection of maybe this legacy world and this kind of radical a new way of thinking, then we can all move forward, right? But it's like we're right now in that storming, norming, stage as a society, and that is sometimes really difficult.
I think you've hit the nail on the head talking about masculine and feminine, which most people don't understand the philosophy of that. Yeah. The masculine being the structural, finding the container, which is where we started from. What is the model that you're working towards? And the feminine is the collaboration. And I think they say that what women used to bring in, but I think the feminine aspect of working is the collaborative method. Yeah. And I think women are learning to activate, as Jung used to call their animus, which is taking what's inside out, and men are taking that, allowing that anima be the inspiration, and that's what you're activating, what's happening inside each of us. And that masculine and feminine are totally different, and it's time that was addressed. But who do you turn to when you want to listen to a female speaker? Who do you listen to? Because men have, whenever I go online to listen, the people that impact on the world are mostly men. They are vocal, as you say, they are out there. I love that, and it's great to listen to, and it makes me incredibly aware when I deal with my clients, both male and women, and couples and so on. But this is what influences the world. Who do you listen to as the woman that might actually create a new dynamic in the world as well? Is there somebody?
So I'm going to just give a quick answer from my perspective and hand it over to Nicole, but I think this distinction between masculine and feminine is really important, and what I would add to that is to understand that there are men out there who have very feminine qualities in them, and there are women who have masculine qualities. So me, when I listen to a podcast, all podcasts I listen to are actually men, because I have a lot of masculine qualities in me. I'm very much like an alpha type of a female, and you might see it on me, but just the way I talk, the type of words I would use is
in psychological types. If you because Jung started psychological types, people don't realize that. That's the thinking type. Most men are thinking type, and they did an evaluation of that. Very few women at that point were thinking types. So being a thinking type, I go along with that, and that's where I sit, because you feel outside that spectrum with women. But most women are what they call feeling types. Now that I think is gradually changing as well.
Yes.
But you have to learn how to change that. So that's another psychological, I think it's quite an interesting opportunity just to sort of introduce that. But coming back to you talking about being alpha, if you like, it's a nice place to be.
I just want to, it's just to say, hey, it's not really necessarily, we're not talking men and women here. We're talking about different qualities that are typically attached to a man or a woman, but ultimately it could be the other way around, and in my case, I find myself, it's definitely a mix, but I have a lot of those sporty qualities in me, and I love listening to men who share those type of values, right? Because that's where I connect. Just
away from gender.
Exactly. That's exactly it, right? Looking at the essence of that, but definitely in the corporate world, there is a need to infuse a little bit more of the feminine qualities, if you like, right? Because it traditionally was completely on the extreme of the masculine. We are now seeing more and more work, and it's the work that we do around vulnerability, how to be human in a workplace, how to actually, if you're the CEO today and you're not showing the human side of you, you're going to have an issue. People want to know who you are as a person, what you care about, what are the causes you're investing in, what are you doing on the weekends, where are you donating your money, like all these things people want to really care about. And so we are now moving into a world that is, I would say, more balanced. And on that journey, there is a little bit, sometimes some extreme thinking that now we need to swing completely in the other extreme. I think we're aiming for the middle here, but we're still, on the journey, right?
And do you feel, who do you listen to, Nicole?
Yeah, if I must admit, also more men than women in terms of podcasts. And we have some women in our network that I really admire for the work they have done and for the voices they are, like Sally Helgeson. She has written amazing books. She's a good friend of ours, and her first book was, not the first book, one of her bestsellers was How Women Rise, and her last book is about rising together. And I really love that, because for me, that's what it is supposed to be. We have to do this together. That's the only way forward for society. And so at the same time, I think we also have different levels of consciousness that we are dealing with in our society. And so different ways of seeing the world, different perceptions, and that makes it all more complicated. It doesn't matter then in which vessel, in which body we are, if we have a female or a male body, or these days there's many more forms. It's also about the levels of consciousness we bring to the table, and the way we see the world and what we believe is possible.
And that's why, coming back to your structure, you were saying a unified structure, unified vision.
Yep.
And once everybody can explore that unified vision, whether it's in corporate, but these corporates, I think what you're addressing here, what we're addressing, is the corporate structure plus the individual within that corporate structure and the stress point. So are there, well, let's just come to the close of this, but it's, as you say, it's such a big topic. The world is changing so fast. But let's come back to stress. Let's call it stress before it gets to burnout. What are the suggestions you would make in your observations about stress in a culture, in a company? How can, before it gets too extreme, I won't go into how extreme life can get for some people, because there's this whole expectation that if you're in a really stressful situation, you should be able to reach out. Why didn't he call me? Why didn't she call me?
Yeah.
Because people don't at that point. Let's make it clear. People, when they're super stressed or burnt out or under that much pressure, they don't reach out. So the point is, how do you create a culture where people look after each other? Is that the ideal?
Yeah. So in one of our one of our 5 driving forces is the Leadership Alliance behaviors. And when we work with behaviors, we work with a specific model, which is called the process communication model by Dr. Tate. It is a clinically, scientifically validated model. And what is special about it is that it does not only show us how we tick and how our personality architecture works, but it also shows us our psychological needs, and it gives us our predictive behaviors under stress. So it shows our 1st degree distress, our 2nd degree distress, and the 3rd degree distress. And for individuals, for leaders, it really starts with understanding my own behaviors. If I understand my stress patterns, and I understand that this is a predictable pattern that comes with my personality, that is what it is. We all have it. We don't have to judge it. But it starts with awareness, because a lot of people think they're simply emotional, or it's normal. and understanding, oh, this is my pattern, and the reason this happens is because my psychological needs are unfulfilled, I can self-manage. I can recognize it, I can hold myself back, I can take care of myself, and that's where it starts first. Now, when we do this with teams, we share this with each other, and it's super powerful because when we understand it from each other, we can help each other. So we learn to look for what is the need, the unmet need underneath the behavior. So we work with transparency. So in a team working with this model, we will experience then that people say, oh, I'm feeling my stress patterns. And colleagues will answer, okay, how can we help you? Let's take a deep breath.
So let me interrupt there just 1 minute,
Yeah.
because that's so important
Mm-hmm.
to be able to announce that in a group,
Yeah.
when you're at work, when there's so much. A lot of people feel they can't say that at work, especially I'm stressed.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
because it's such it shows the vulnerability. It
Yeah,
shows
absolutely.
that perhaps you're not getting it, that you're not doing your work properly,
Yeah.
that you might fall over, that you might not be able to complete the job you're doing. Somebody else will have to step in. It has so many connotations to it. How do you help organisations see that it's okay to say, look, I'm stressed?
I think it's through the way that we lead these teams. We create a very safe space, and we role model ourselves. So as coaches, we will also step into our own vulnerability and share examples of how we have dealt with things ourselves.
Can you go into that then? How do you deal with stress yourself? Because you're in that work. You're actually responsible. The people will see you
Yes.
being responsible for changing culture. How do you deal with those stresses?
So Marina and myself, we detect our stress levels very early on. So we have very little escalations, or no, we haven't. We haven't had real escalations, I would say, because we detect them very early on. So for instance, when I feel I am stressed, I know that I go in way too much detail, and I also know that I will then spend way too much time on writing maybe an email that should take 10 minutes. It will then take me half an hour. Instead of going there, I then typically call you and just tell her, hey, I'm stuck. This doesn't work right now. I feel my stress pattern. We just address it openly, and then it's by having the conversation that I get out, and it's maybe a 5-minute conversation that then unlocks.
Do you think that's because of the work you do?
I was gonna add to that. So I mean, what Nicole is describing, she makes it sound so easy, but it's a very unfair advantage that we have, which is the level of self-awareness. Yeah. And so we go back to what she was saying. Basically, in my experience, the reason why most people don't ask for help is because they're not even aware really what is happening to them until it's too late. So the level of awareness is not that, and then it just hits them kind of all of a sudden, right? And then they struggle, to handle it, right? So what do I do now with this? Where did this come from? It's something that surely I need to figure out on my own, and so self-awareness is key.
Absolutely.
It starts there, and it is the best burnout prevention possible, I think. And to go back to your question of how to help organizations understand that, we talk about what is the opportunity cost if you don't do that. Yeah, we don't need to talk about stress, but then you're going to have burnout left and right that is completely uncontrolled, completely outside of your control. It's going to happen anyway. So is that a better way, or is it better that you see the early warning signs and then you have an opportunity to intervene? And sometimes maybe there's not much you can do, because sometimes someone is experiencing stress factors at home or whatever it might be, but at least you can stay close to that individual,
yeah,
right?
Because coming back to the point where people, when they're super stressed, they do not reach out because they don't know that they are super stressed.
Yeah.
They just see a way out.
No.
I've got to do this, or I'm going to shut down one way or another. Yeah, and you're taking over, and it's not only on a physical level, but people can feel it physically as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's why I love dream work as well. Dreams can actually just prise open the tin, that Pandora's box.
And the physical element, just to add to that, so I don't forget, but I think it's so important, and it is actually one of the best ways to kind of start increasing self-awareness. We ask our clients, when you stress, where do you feel it? Yeah. Someone feels their, hands sweating, someone feels it in the shoulders, couch. Actually, positive stress in a way is what drives us, right?
Yeah, and the basic human condition is stress.
Yeah.
Freud had Thanatos and Eros as the two driving principles. Thanatos being death, moving towards death, or fighting death, if you like, running away from it. I know I'm going to die at some point, but I don't want to die today. But they called it Eros, as love, but it was Eris, which is that level of anxiety. So all those primary, psychological theories are based on struggle, stress, conflict. We're moving from one thinking pattern to another. Is this good for me? I'll behave like this. No, I'm going to be outrageous. No, I'm going to be a saint. That's me, by the way. And everybody struggles with that. Yeah. How am I going to deal with this? And it's that internal build-up that people can have. But should businesses then have a regular coach like yourself, self-aware coach, because you both are incredibly self-aware, but lots of coaches are sort of, this is the container, this is the model, and you have to fit into that model, which isn't quite the same. So yours, as you talk about the ecosystem, I can sense that. Do you think businesses should have their own counsellor in-house, so the person can just go off and let off steam and just say, I'm feeling stressed and I just need to get this off my chest, and I mean, we were talking here with Sanjeev, who is the owner, Sanjeev Kumar, that he's going to build a room that you can go and scream in, just to get stuff off your chest, which is great, isn't it? Because it doesn't take it out on anybody, but at this moment there is that build-up, and you've got to let it go somewhere. So how do you feel about having every culture, every company should have their own therapist or their own scream room?
Why not?
Yeah, why not?
Well, I think we need each other. It is consciousness cannot observe itself. It's like I always say, the jam in the jar cannot read its own label.
I like that.
So when we're in it, it's so hard to see things. And when we are a little outside, it's so easy to point to things that when you're in it are so hard to see. And I think that's really the value of having an executive coach team or an advisor. They help you see the things that you don't see because you're in the jar.
Yeah, but I will just add that there are companies out there who have that, right? So there are companies like, if we look at the International Coaching Federation, and I sat on the panel of judges one year when we were assessing companies around the world for the maturity of their coaching culture. The ones that are most advanced, and it's definitely not something we see frequently, but there are companies out there, the most advanced ones, they have internal teams of coaches, and a lot of them also have psychotherapy or psychology background and all of that. That's not to say that they don't work with external advisors as a support, but they understand that they need also internal resources fully dedicated to that, right? So someone who really understands the business, the strategy, the culture, inside and out, and who is able to then connect that to that human factor so that they can then also meaningfully bring people like us on board. And so it's a slow transformation process, but it is happening out there. So companies are more and more actually seeing this as a valuable investment of their resources. Yeah.
So just to finalize, we're talking also about leaders. What can leaders tell their companies or people that they work with how to not get into that stressful situation, or how the company can perceive them? What messages can leaders give to people so that they don't fall into the trap that people are falling into, where burnout plays a part? Because burnout shouldn't be in our culture, but it is. Yeah. And can leaders help people just through something that they say, something they identify, something that they say it's okay to feel like this? Should leaders be saying that to their teams?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, and I'll let Nicole add to that, but I would say it's a simple answer is just creating that safe space to bring that up and making burnout not a taboo, making it be something that is okay to have a conversation about, because that actually benefits them. If they have their employees who are able to raise their concerns early, then they have the opportunity to do something about it and hopefully prevent, because burnout is eventually very costly for organizations. Let's speak about bottom line for a second, right? It's very costly. Just to put the human cost aside of what it costs, the individual, but if you look at it from an organizational point of view, it's something that is simply very expensive. And so if we can prevent that, it's a win-win.
Yeah, I agree. And what we also see is that there's a lot of wellness initiatives in companies. But then when we look at the executive suite, they don't role model. And that's a problem.
What would you like to see?
If there would be role modeling of how to do things differently, how to be successful in another way, instead of being under constant pressure or operating from... A lot of the pressure is put onto ourselves. There's still a lot of false beliefs around that I have to come from a very pressured, busy position to be seen as successful and hardworking. So if we want to promote wellness in the organizations, it is very new and very out of comfort zone to walk through a company in a relaxed way and be successful. So how can we be more relaxed and be successful and experience that? I think that is the more sustainable solution in the long run. And when I say relaxed, I don't mean go and have a rest and lay back. But I mean coming from an energy that is in the present moment, with my full presence in the here and now. Because it's only when I'm connected to my anxieties in the past or the fears for the future that I am in this restless modus of being pressured and stressed, because actually I'm here with you, but in my head I'm with all the things I still need to do. So I think being more present, being in the here and now, and reconnecting with that relaxed energy inside of us, that is the essence of who we are, if that would be role modeled at the executive levels, we would see a whole different organization.
And different leadership.
And different leadership, yes.
Nicole Heinemann and Marina Chetkovich, Thank you so much for engaging with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure and eye-opening into the type of coaching you do, which is immense and so important and empowering. And this is Harley of London. I'm Dr Maria Kempinska. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.